Hi, everyone. Welcome to Generational Change. I'm getting ready to interview Ryan Knight. He has a podcast as well called Amped Up, and he is a progressive voice, which we all know we need many of. And I was fortunate enough to connect with Ryan during our campaign, and he was um, very supportive and had me on his show and was just always very Team Gen 2020. So I'm forever appreciative of that. And I'm actually looking forward to interviewing him on the other end because I really don't know that much about him. So we're gonna find out. That's gonna be really interesting. I'm actually looking forward to discussing with Ryan some of the perils that we share as progressives. It's, where we fight a battle within our own party. Sometimes it seems more than we do against an opposing party, if there really were an opposing party. But he is somebody that I know feels that pain because you're forever being slammed from the left because you're not progressive enough, and you're being slammed from the right because you're being too critical of the left. And it's a very hard position to be in, especially for people that have we have resigned ourselves to the fact that right now in this country, we have to be able to make changes within the Democratic Party. I'm not discounting efforts by third parties by any stretch. And I know that Ryan participated and helped create the Movement for a People's Party, that the convention, or the virtual convention that was put together. And I know that he is definitely somebody that is supportive of that. But I think that also recognizes that we need to be doing this from multiple fronts at the same time. So that's really what we're doing. Is we're not discounting third parties. I'm extremely supportive of third parties, but we still need to be able to function within the confines of where we are. And that's just the sad reality that we're in right now as progressives that are stuck in dealing with the Democratic Party to some extent. So we will talk about our, I guess, shared resignation, at least as far as this election is concerned, and what that really entails. I think that there is this false concept that I'm seeing a lot right now from the left, that if you that there's not a capability of voting for Biden while simultaneously holding him accountable. I can only speak for myself. I have every intention of maintaining every bit of criticism that I have of Joe Biden as a person in general, as somebody who has some, as far as I'm concerned, very credible allegations against him of sexual assault. And these things don't go away. They just don't. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm not condoning anything having to do with Joe Biden's history in the Senate, as his time and as vice president, as any part of his career where I can safely say I've consistently always been opposed to this types of policies that Joe Biden has been a proponent of. Obviously, the crime bill is a massive problem for me. That doesn't go away. But do I have to take that with a grain of salt right now when confronted with somebody who has refused to agree to a peaceful transition of power? And ultimately, that is something that is just very, and I've said it before, it's a very authoritative, fascist type of person that would even suggest that. I do not find Biden to be an authoritative fascist. I do find him to be a pawn of a very corporate / fascist type. I don't even know what we are anymore. That's the truth. I don't even know what we are anymore. Maybe I'll get some good insight from Ryan. Okay. So Ryan, I want to talk to you a little bit about what I've been noticing you're dealing with lately, and I'm undoubtedly going to deal with, is the Biden situation. I almost feel like that's how I refer to it, as the Biden situation, because clearly this was not where we wanted to be.
Right.
But yet we have resigned ourselves to that. And it's like constantly
Some of us
getting
have, not
flack
all
from
of
the
us.
left and the right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, I was a member of the Democratic Party for 18 years. I was a loyal, almost blindly obedient Democrat. And I supported Bernie Sanders in the 2016 primary. I just really resonated with his bold message that we needed to shake things up and fight for the dignity that everyone in this country deserves. And then obviously things did not go the progressive way in the primary in 2016. And so I got on board and supported Hillary and campaigned for Hillary. This cycle, I'm not supporting the Democratic nominee. I have made the personal decision for me is that, and it's hard because people will hear that and think, oh, you're supporting Trump. And it's like, no, I'm not supporting Trump. I don't support either corporate party. I don't support the kind of politics that puts where these corporations who are bought and paid for by Wall Street, giant corporations, and the billionaire class, put their interests over the interests of working people and over the sustainability of our planet. And the Democratic Party has been pushing this, kind of using this lesser of two evils excuse for a long time now. People can go back and look at Hunter S. Thompson, who in 1972, right, so 48 years ago, wrote that the Democratic Party, instead of pushing for meaningful progress, they basically just run a campaign of being the lesser of two evils and basically saying, vote for us because the Republicans are worse. And that kind of thinking, it's like, how is America ever going to get better? Don't just think about this election. Just think about the big picture. How are we ever going to get better if our two choices are evil or lesser evil? At some point, for America to get better, you have to vote for good. You have to vote for a party and for politicians who don't want to go into government and work for the billionaire class and work for these giant multinational corporations who are holding our government by the throat. We need to vote for politicians who want to go in there and actually work for the people. It's really that simple. And so when people want to sit and blame Trump for everything, Trump to me has always just been a symptom. The disease that is destroying America is unchecked, unregulated capitalism that now has a hold over not just, the working class, but over both corporate parties in Washington. And so when I realized all that, I knew that I was going to take a lot of flack. But at some point, if this has been going on for the last half century, brave people have to stand up and take their power back from the Democratic Party. Brave people have to stand up and say, I'm not going to allow you to take my vote for granted anymore. Because if we keep doing this, they will just continue to take our vote for granted. And one thing that really concerned me, there's a report in NPR out that Wall Street has given more money this cycle. They've given almost $1 billion this cycle to both on the 2020, campaign. And they've given more money to the Democratic Party than to the Republican Party. Now, basically, it's like, that's legal bribery, right? And so
Yes.
I don't care how scary you think Trump is. What's scarier to me is that Democrats are allowed to be bribed by Wall Street and then pretend like they serve the people, because we're essentially handing them power with zero pushback or accountability. And so what ends up happening is, look, if I support and stand in solidarity with every leftist and everyone who is deciding to vote for Biden, like, I'm not a vote shamer on either side. So like, if you've made the decision to vote for Biden, I support you in doing that. But I wish that people would also support those of us who are brave enough to not vote for one of the corporate candidates who is just going to continue this oligarchic and corporate system that is not working for the majority of this country. I wish they would give us a little bit of respect too. And we don't get that respect. And I get that because I understand that people are scared. But I also think that fear is what the Democratic Party has weaponized, right? Because just think of it real simplistically. It is possible to beat Donald Trump and fight for the meaningful change that we need to move this country forward, right? You can do both, but the corporate Democrats aren't doing that. The DNC isn't doing that, right? They voted against Medicare for all. They voted against legalizing marijuana. They voted against banning corporate lobbyists to serve on the board of the DNC. They are voting against all of the systemic changes we need and then saying, well, Trump is so bad, so you got to vote for us because we're going to save you. And it's like, how are you saving us if you're participating in the same corrupt system that the Republicans are participating in? And so this idea of like, let's just keep voting for the lesser of two evils, A, it's never going to make our country better. And B, is the Democratic Party even the lesser of two evils when everything they're doing is emboldening the greater evil, right? How is Pelosi and the Democrats, quote unquote, resisting Trump when they're voting for his military budget? How are the corporate Democrats, resisting fascism when they're funding fascism? How are they resisting him when they're voting for his authoritarian programs like the Patriot Act, which is mass surveillance, or when they're voting for militarized policing? And so when you come to unpack our political system, you realize that we on the left get demonized as like, oh, they're so radical and they're so extreme. I'd like to open people's eyes up to the fact that, in my view, what's extreme are two corporate parties who support endless wars. In my view, what is extreme are two corporate parties who bail out Wall Street and giant corporations when the economy tanks, and then working people, lose their homes and their livelihoods. What's extreme for me is two corporations who continue to provide fossil fuel subsidies to the big oil companies, despite the fact that the climate crisis is bearing down upon us. What's extreme to me is that, both corporate parties support this blind capitalistic system that again is not working for the majority of the people. 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. 2 billionaires now own more wealth than half of our entire nation. So what's extreme to me is the corporate duopoly. And what's just and compassionate and reasonable to me is the left and our progressives who are fighting for a Medicare for all single payer healthcare system. What is reasonable and compassionate to me is progressives and leftists who are fighting for a Green New Deal to save our planet. What's reasonable and compassionate to me are leftists and progressives who are fighting for, a $25 an hour living wage and to bring democracy into the workplace with things like worker cooperatives to give the working class more power against these CEOs who just keep making more and more money while everyone else is doing worse and worse.
I, for some reason, was under the impression that you had sort of resigned yourself to Biden, and everyone who watches me or knows me knows I ultimately did vote for him. I voted Stein in 2016. I have no regrets of that. I absolutely, and honestly, I would have picked Trump over Hillary regardless in that one. So, I have no qualms about that. And I agree with 100% with everything you said. This was not an easy decision for me. And ultimately for me, what it came down to is, while I do find both of them to be part of a corporate fascist regime, like, to me, that's just clear what you're saying.
Yep.
I find Trump personally, and I really hadn't up until recently, I find him to be an authoritative fascist in himself. When he declined to say he would support a peaceful transition of power, and that to me was where I can draw a definitive line, because as much as I do think that everything you said is true and Biden is absolutely the architect of the nightmare we're living in now, and I by no means excuse any of that. I've said that many times, nor do I excuse him for what I consider to be a very credible sexual assault allegation. All of these things must be dealt with. I have no intention of saying that doesn't exist.
Right.
But I don't find him to be an authoritative fascist person. And so to me, ultimately, that was where I drew the line when I heard someone say they wouldn't support a peaceful transition of power. But in terms of like the corporatism and what you're saying is everything is true. And I have, like, I'm definitely catching crap from the left and being voter shamed in that way. I catch crap from the right for even dare to still criticize Biden. And when I say right, I mean right Democrats,
Yeah.
not the actual right. So I thought that you were in that same position. I didn't realize that you were not voting, you were not supporting Biden. And I by no means have any voter shaming in me whatsoever. Like
No, same with me. Like I stand in solidarity with you. I would never shame you for exercising your right to vote. I mean,
yeah,
you're right about Trump's authoritarianism. You're absolutely right. He is an authoritarian. But he is he's a blatant authoritarian. Everyone knows that he's authoritarian. What really actually worries me and deeply concerns me is how authoritarian the Democratic Party is becoming itself. And I'll give you some examples. If you truly believe in democracy, then you believe in everyone having the right to vote for who they want to vote for and the parties they want to vote for. Well, this cycle, the Democratic Party is kicking the Green Party off of ballots.
Yes.
That is authoritarianism.
Yes.
That is not democracy. When you look back and see what the Democrat Party did to Bernie Sanders in 2016, and what they did to Bernie Sanders and how they rigged the primary against him. And there was a court case that I know you know because you ran against Debbie Wasserman Schultz and she was the head of the DNC. In this, and I don't know why this isn't a bigger national story, because to me, it's one of the biggest stories in the last 4 years. In this court trial against the DNC, people sued them for rigging the primary against Bernie. The lawyers for the DNC argued in court. You can go Google this. This is fact. The DNC lawyers argued that the DNC is a private corporation and has every right to go into a back cigar-filled room and pick out the candidates themselves.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
That is a DNC lawyer saying they don't have to respect the will of the people and they can rig the primary in a back cigar-filled room. And when you look and see West Virginia, Bernie won West Virginia. Guess what? At the DNC convention in 2016, they gave West Virginia to Hillary Clinton, and there were other states where that happened too. So this idea that the Democratic Party believes in democracy when it doesn't even believe in the will of primary voters in their own primaries, and that if someone wins who they don't like, they'll just pick the other candidate. That's not democracy. And other things that have concerned me with the Democrat Party is, again, this, my big epiphany was finally waking up and seeing through all of the platitudes that they feed the people, right? Oh, yeah. These platitudes of hope and change that Obama spouted for 8 years and that, Hillary spouts and Pelosi spouts, and now Joe Biden is spouting. They use those platitudes to cover up the fact that just like the Republican Party, they are bought and paid for and beholden to Wall Street, giant corporations, and the billionaire class. So that to me is dangerous because when they're telling people that they're for the people, but then they're turning around and governing for their corporate donors, they're literally deceiving the American people.
Right.
When they do that. And, the Republican Party I disagree with everything they stand for, but they're not out there saying that they rep the working class, and they're not out there saying that they're for the people.
And
Republican
ironically,
Party's
I think
out there
they
just
do
like,
more.
yeah, capitalism, yeah, Wall Street, yeah, billionaires. They're not covering that part of their identity up, whereas the Democrats are very sinister.
Yes.
And then I'll take it a step further. They co-opt the language of the progressive movement that me and you both fight for, but they don't support the policies that the progressive movement is fighting for.
No, it's nefarious. And so it's very nefarious.
Yeah, and the reason they co-opt the language of our movement is because they want our votes. And I'll give you an example. Corporate Democrats like Biden or Pelosi will go on CNN and they will say with a straight face to the people that climate change is real, but they won't support a Green New Deal, which is the policy we need.
They won't stop taking fossil fuel money. They won't stop taking the money.
They won't ban fracking, but they'll keep using the same platitude over and over that climate change is real, yet they won't take the measures we need to do anything about it. They do the same thing with healthcare. They will say that healthcare is a human right, but they won't fight for the policy in Medicare for all that will make healthcare a human right. They do the same thing in the racial justice movement. They'll say that Black Lives Matter, but they won't fight to defund the police and shift resources into Black and brown communities. So we don't have a law enforcement officer showing up when a Black person is sound asleep in a parking lot at Wendy's, so we can have a social welfare person come and check on that man,
Right.
instead of the police who ended up shooting and killing him. And so when you realize that it's just all lip service and platitudes, and then you wake up and you realize, like, wow, for the last half century, both corporate parties have been kicking the can down the road for all of these systemic crises, and they haven't been doing anything about them. The rich has been getting richer, the poor has been getting poorer. And when you realize that, like, we're in a moment in history where platitudes are not enough. Platitudes are not going to stop the climate crisis. Platitudes are not going to stop the economic inequality crisis. Platitudes are not going to stop the racial injustice crisis. And so we have major problems, and all the Democratic Party wants to offer is platitudes. And if we ever want to see real change in this country, that has to stop now. But the only way it will stop is if people are brave enough to hold them accountable. And when you say things like vote blue no matter who, and here's my thing with vote blue no matter who. It's not, this is how sinister it was. They didn't say that in the general election after Biden won, right? The DNC and all these liberals and corporate Democrats weren't pushing vote blue no matter who in the general. They were pushing that since the beginning of the primary process, when democracy hadn't even happened in the primary. They were all saying, Trump is so bad, using all the fear mongering.
Yeah.
And so no matter what, we just have to vote blue no matter who. And when you say that, what you're saying is that policy doesn't matter. What you're saying is that what's even the point of having a primary, because we're just going to, all support who you blindly tell us to support. That's not democracy. That's blind obedience to a corporate party that actually, they might say they have our best interests at heart, but any party that forces you to vote for the lesser of two evils for 40 plus years now doesn't really have our best interests at heart. They have their corporate donors' interests at heart. So that's why, like, this cycle, as much blowback as I've taken, I put my foot down. Like, I'm not going to vote for the lesser of two evils ever again. I'm going to vote for good. I'm going to fight for good. I think a lot of people, we are in dark times, and I get that. And so I think a lot of people have to kind of tell themselves the good side of things, or paint things as more optimistic, because they don't want to actually look and see how corrupt everything truly is. Like, even let's say, in a fairy tale, for example, in a fairy tale, there's a good guy and a bad guy. And so, you root for the good guy. Like, this isn't a fairy tale. We live in a nightmare.
People love labels. People love
there's
labels.
No good guy. If we want there to be good, we have to fight and build and create that. And so I think the more people enable the Democrat Party, like, think of it this way. All these DNC operatives right now, with groups like the Lincoln Project, and that have basically, the DNC has been able to run a campaign when millions of Americans are suffering and need real transformative policies to help them, instead of actually fighting for those policies and running on those policies. The DNC's entire message has basically been vote for us because Trump is worse. And so what the message the DNC is going to take from this election, because I'll tell your listeners, look, Biden's going to win. I'm 100% sure Biden will win. Yeah. But my second prediction, and my sad prediction, is that nothing will fundamentally change, because the DNC didn't have to make one major concession to progressives. So they're going to look at this cycle and take this information and go, okay, well, we can just keep taking corporate money. We can just keep, doing the Wall Street grift. We can just keep governing for the ruling class, because y'all didn't hold us accountable. You didn't make us make any real concessions. You didn't make us adopt Medicare for all, or a Green New Deal, or universal basic income, or, housing for all, or any of the real bold policies we need to move us forward. So the DNC is just going to continue to move right until the people are strong enough to hold them accountable.
It's true. No, I agree. And I said at the moment when I bubbled in my little bubble for Biden, I made a very conscious choice that I'm going to spend the next 4 years fighting him as much as I possibly can. And
good.
I am very committed to saying that I will never support Kamala Harris for president of this country. So, and I say that
because that's
like I will spend the next,
you know,
4
that's
years.
where they're going. They're going to go Kamala in 2024.
Yeah.
And then get ready, everyone. They're going to do Pete Buttigieg in 2028.
Yeah.
See, what the progressives don't realize is the DNC is always 10 steps ahead of us.
Yeah.
Because they've built this, the DNC has built this machine over the last century.
Yeah.
The reason they have so much power is because they have built, you know, these institutions and the establishment over the last 100 years. I think
whatever happens, I mean, and this is something like I am very committed to primarying in 2024.
Yeah.
I think that we need to look at this next 4 years as we need to really gear up and quite honestly, you know, if that's within the party or if that's without the party, but we need to make a very strong commitment to the next 4 years to get something better in 24. And that's so I agree that there's definitely going to be a very huge sect of the party that's just going to put their heads back in the sand and they're not going to care. But there are a certain amount of people like me that by no means see this as, okay, this fixes things. This is just hitting the pause button in a way. And I said from the beginning, at a minimum, I know that Biden will get us back into the Paris Climate Agreement. And that to me is, and look, they're not going to stop taking fossil fuel money. I know that.
No,
but
they already removed that very sneakily from the platform at the DNC. They just literally took it out of the platform and fossil fuel subsidies.
I know. And I will, and again, it is like a personal mission for me that I will spend like every day of the next 4 years reminding everybody of this and fighting to get somebody else in 24. Yeah. So, I mean, I understand that this is a horrid situation. And like I said, I felt in 16, I am very content with my green vote. The Greens really kind of pissed me off this year. I don't feel for them. And I've always said that the Republicans are infinitely more Democratic than the Democrats. The Republicans don't have super delegates.
They don't.
No, the Republicans didn't want Trump, but that's who the people wanted. And that's who they put up because they actually are more Democratic within their machine than the Democrats.
I'm glad you said that. And here's one thing that, and thank you for saying that for the next 4 years, you're going to work to build progressive power because that is what we have to do. Now, I believe it has to be a two-tiered strategy. You know, I support down ballot progressives. I supported your campaign. I endorsed your campaign. I endorsed 35 down ballot progressives this cycle in the primary who ran against corporate Democrats. And you ran a fantastic campaign, Jen. And you brought moral clarity to your district. You went out and campaigned for things like Medicare for all and a Green New Deal and basically, educated your district that like you guys deserve a government that is on your side. You deserve to live with dignity. You deserve you deserve not to continue to lose everything every time the market crashes. Yeah. Because we have a recession on average every 6.5 years now. Since 1929, there's literally a recession every 6.5 years on average. We've had 14 since the Great Depression. And this kind of failed trickle-down economics and these boom-bust cycles that capitalism keeps us in, the ruling class is able to extract as much wealth as possible, right? And then when the market crashes, that hurts the poor and the working class more than anyone else. So they have to actually build everything all over again. So what it come to find out, working people can't even build real wealth under this, this basically blind capitalist system that we're living in. So we have to continue, like you did, to primary these corporate Democrats. But I also believe that that's not enough. We can't just fight to change the system within. The progressive movement also has to build power outside of the corporate parties so we can challenge them. I think it's important for people to know that the reason FDR, which is the biggest signature piece of progressive legislation that this nation has pretty much ever seen, that gave power to working people and held these corporate interests accountable. The reason FDR passed the New Deal wasn't because of the Democrat Party. It was because we had a strong socialist party and we had a strong communist party, if you can believe that, people out there listening. We had stronger parties. Those parties are basically gone now because corporate power has destroyed them. But that's the point, is when there were other parties, the Socialist Party pressured FDR. They don't get credit, right? Because the ruling class and the corporate parties write history because they're the dominant parties. But the reason we had a New Deal is because the socialists and communists pressured FDR. We need that same kind of working class pressure pushing these corporate parties from the outside. That is why I am voting green in this cycle at the top of the ticket, why I'm voting down ballot progressives for the rest of my ticket. And the thing with the Green Party for me is, although I'm supporting them at the top of the ticket in this cycle, they've had about 30 plus years to try to break the duopoly.
Yes.
And they haven't had much success doing it.
And you know what?
And
let's
that
look
is something
at that.
You
we
have
could
to
look at
that.
why.
And because look, politics is I'm in politics to give. For me, politics isn't about winning for your corporate team like the red and the blue teams think. It's about winning power for the people. And I'm in politics to win power for the people and to make their lives better. But unfortunately, politics is about messaging and branding as well. And the messaging and branding from the Green Party hasn't been strong enough to break through these two corporate parties. And the other part is, when you go up against these corporate parties, to win, you have to be able to build a multiracial, multi-generational, working class coalition, very much like the coalition Bernie put together in 2016 and then again in 2020 that almost did it, right? That almost broke through. Now, the reason, so I'm helping the movement for a People's Party. I know, we had a big convention a month and a half ago, and we had our keynote speakers were Nina Turner and Cornel West. We had people like Chris Hedges, and I was one of the speakers, and we had Tim Black was one of the speakers.
I watched it very enthusiastically. I was very pleased. It was sort of like a party with all my favorite people.
And
I think and I agree 100%. Actually, before you came on, one of the things I said is that this needs to be done from multiple fronts. This isn't something that is one or the other.
Exactly.
I completely, wholeheartedly support third parties. I think that I'd be happy if we actually had two. Yeah. We don't have a Labor Party. And that's really what this comes down to.
And that's we do not have one. We have two corporate parties who both represent Wall Street. And if we're ever going to fight back against all of this injustice and inequality in our country, you can't have two parties that both represent Wall Street. One party has to represent the people, has to represent labor. And you're absolutely right. That, to me, is the real problem in America, that the people with the most money have the most representation in our government, and the people with the least amount of money have no representation in our government. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
And so that is the idea behind the movement for a People's Party, to build a real working class labor party that real democracies in the world have. Go to Europe, look in every political system in Europe. Our Democratic Party, quote unquote Democratic Party in America, is the right party in all of the European countries. So all of the quote unquote Republicans in Europe, they support a universal healthcare system. They support Medicare for all. They support socialized medicine. So our Democrats are more to the right than the right parties in Europe.
Yeah.
America is a right-wing nation. You can just clearly argue that we don't have a left party in America. We have two right-wing parties. And yes, the Republicans are further to the right, but the Democratic Party is not a left party.
Yeah, I reject that.
We have a few left members like AOC and Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib.
But are they really left?
They're not.
Don't know.
No, they're not as left as I am. So they're not like true socialists.
No. Well, Bernie's not a socialist, and he never should have said as such. And had he said from the beginning that he was a social democrat, and he never said that, then it wouldn't have been able to be used against him when he is in fact not a socialist. Yeah. If he were, then you own it, but he's not, and it never has been. So,
and the thing is that like AOC is really the true center, though, the true moral center in America. Because when you look at polling, the majority of the American people support Medicare for all.
Of course.
The majority of the American people support a Green New Deal. The majority of the American people support universal college and
legalizing marijuana.
And legalizing marijuana. The majority of the American people support leftist policies.
Yes.
So then people will say, well, why don't we have leftist policies? Why don't we have a left party? That's because both parties are captured by corporations and Wall Street and the billionaire class, and they prevent those parties from passing the popular policies that the people want. That is literally what it means to live in an oligarchy.
Yeah.
Democracy is a
we are, and
government
we've
that's
been
of,
for
by,
years.
and for the people. An oligarchy is a government that is of, by, and for the ruling class. And that is what America is. So when these vote blue no matter who people say that they're voting for Joe Biden to save democracy, they're lying. They're not, you can't save democracy because we don't have democracy.
No, we
there is
are
no democracy in America.
No.
The thing is if you want there to be a democracy in America, then we have to build a democracy in America. Because right now, you know, I hate to, again, say these uncomfortable truths, but America's problems did not start when Trump won in 2016, and America's problems will not go away when Trump loses next month.
And I think that that's November what I'm
3rd.
saying.
And, you know, America was an oligarchy before Donald Trump, and America will be an oligarchy after Donald Trump. So if you don't want to live in this oligarchic nation where the ruling class keeps getting richer and richer and the working class and the poor keep getting poorer and poorer, then you have to fight outside of these two corporate parties. Because just like this cycle, everyone said, okay, I'm just going to vote for the lesser of two evils. Okay, I'm going to settle for Biden. I saw a license plate the other day that said, this is BS, settling for Biden or something like that. And I thought to myself, like, well, some people will be like, yeah, she's doing something heroic. It's like, no, we shouldn't have to settle.
No.
If we keep settling and keep compromising with these corporate parties, there will be nothing left, people. There will be nothing left in 50 years. This is a fight for the soul of humanity, for there to actually be a sustainable planet for future generations, for there to actually be a working class. You know, the working class keeps shrinking and shrinking. I don't even understand what these billionaires and these corporate parties are doing. Like, have you studied history? The levels
they're just trying
of income inequality here are higher than they were before the French Revolution. So when politicians and corrupt governments throughout history do this, they leave the people only one choice, but to fight back and have a revolution against this corrupt system because they see no hope for themselves or their grandchildren. So these are the times we find ourselves in. It's not great. I don't love having to say this stuff because what ends up happening is I get death threats on Twitter and I get harassed by liberals. You don't even know, like I've got people, they dug up my DUIs I got 20 years ago. Before I got sober, I'm 9 years sober today. I used to be a drug addict and an alcoholic. Yes, I got 2 DUIs when I was 18 and 20.
What does that have to do with anything?
Well, because they're trying to silence me. So 2 weeks ago, a DNC operative released my DUIs on Twitter. Like that is what those of us who fight back against this corruption, that's what we get. So the only reason I share that is, do you think I enjoy this? Do you think I want this? Like, do you think I want to put myself out there in a way where I'm getting exposed? No, I do it because if nobody fights back against the corruption, then we will never have justice or dignity or a real democratic nation. We have to fight back. And that is why, like, for the two-tiered strategy, yes, please keep supporting AOC and please keep electing down ballot progressives like yourself. But also, when 92% at least of the Democratic Party are corporate Democrats who are bought and paid for by Wall Street, the Democratic Party is not a progressive party. It's a corporate party. So the changing the system from within isn't happening fast enough. So we also have to change the system from outside and pressure from outside the castle gates, if you will. And that is why I'm supporting the movement for a People's Party and why I still support the Green Party. I hope they keep doing things after 2020. I support democracy. We should have 4 or 5 parties when you have these presidential debates. The American people should not just have to choose between Coke or Pepsi. There should be Mountain Dew and Sprite and Evian water and Sierra Mist. They should have multiple choices on that debate stage than just 2 corporate parties. And until we have that, we won't have democracy in America. So I just want to applaud everyone who has the courage to fight for something better. And if you think that voting for Biden this cycle, even though he's already going to win, I would just tell you just because you're voting for him don't give him a free pass.
Oh,
Don't blindly support the Democratic Party because right now they've taken more money from Wall Street than the Republicans. So you can say that the Democratic Party is the party of Wall Street right now. They are literally taking more money from the corrupt special interest than Republicans are. So
yeah.
if you want to hold them accountable, hold them accountable. Demand policies. Write your senators, write your representatives, write Joe Biden's campaign. Tell them to support Medicare for all. Tell them to support a Green New Deal. Make these politicians feel uncomfortable. That is their job, to represent the people. Don't shame voters. Don't pressure voters.
Exactly.
Pressure the politicians to actually work for the people, to actually work and give the people something to vote for.
Exactly. I'm doing the combination of both of those things this particular cycle. But I agree. I think that it's pathetic. I think where we've gotten, I actually said, not only will Trump facilitate the revolution, which he has in fact facilitated the revolution,
in many
but
ways,
he to me is the embodiment of this country. I can't think of a better representative or symbol of what we have become in the world than him. So it's interesting how, and the people that are so offended by him, and the stuff that most people have an issue with him are not the things that I have an issue with him. I prefer my wolves dressed like wolves, not like sheep. I don't, when he actually said that we were in Syria for the oil, I was very pleased. I'm like, thank you for your candor, kind sir. Like that to me, it's like, it is what it is. But to think that he does not, that he is somehow an anomaly or does not properly represent what we are, that's delusional. Like it's delusional.
And I'm so glad you said that, because you're not only are you 100% right, but even more, like these liberals who do that, they're trying to find a scapegoat for all our problems because they don't want to look within and see that they're maintaining the status quo and participating in this corrupt system. One thing that always surprises me is that when liberals were shaming Trump for what was going on at the border, which was reprehensible, and I resisted Trump and everything he did, what they also didn't realize is that Obama and Biden built those cages. Yeah. And they also put children in cages. They just didn't put as many as the Republicans did, but they put children in cages. What the liberals don't want to understand is that when the market crashed in 2008, Obama and Biden bailed out the big banks and Wall Street, while the people responsible for the collapse of our economy, while 11 million working class people lost their homes under the Obama administration because our government bails out corporations but doesn't bail out the American people. And so that is why what they don't see is I call it extreme centrism. There is nothing pragmatic about the kind of centrism that the Democratic Party supports. The Democratic Party supports endless wars. That's extreme. The Democratic Party supports bailing out corporations. That's extreme. The Democratic Party supports predatory capitalism. That's extreme. The Democratic Party, when they had all three branches of government in 2008 and 2009 and 2010, what did they do? They passed a Republican healthcare plan. The ACA.
Without a public option.
Without a public option, they passed a for-profit, predatory healthcare system that was a massive gift to the giant insurance companies. Here's another fact liberals hate. Over 4,000 corporate lobbyists descended on Washington to help write the ACA. Okay? Then here's what the Democratic Party does best. They are the PR system of capitalism. They pass a Republican healthcare plan, and then they put Obama out there or Hillary out there or Biden or Pelosi or any of these corporate Democrats who look right in the American people's eye and lie to them and tell them that what they just did was so amazing and that the ACA is so amazing. And
got to protect the ACA. Got to protect it.
They don't tell them that it was a massive gift to insurance companies. They don't tell them that actually everyone's premiums since the ACA was passed have skyrocketed. They don't tell them that over 80,000 Americans die every year because they can't afford the ACA. They don't tell them that over 27 million people aren't insured on the ACA. They don't tell them that 92 million Americans are either underinsured or uninsured under the ACA. So they dress up these kind of Republican conservative policies like the ACA.
They put
and make
lipstick
it
on a
seem,
pig.
and
They put lipstick on a pig.
They make it sound like it's a progressive policy when it's not. What's a progressive policy is Medicare for all. And so that is what these liberals don't realize, is that the agenda that these corporate Democrats are passing is extreme. It makes the ruling class more money and it hurts the working class. It's pretty much the same agenda as the Republican Party's agenda. The Republican Party just dials up the racism to, a higher level than the Democrats do.
Yeah,
but when you look at their agendas, they're very similar. They are 80% of the two corporate parties have the same agenda.
Yeah.
It's just Democrats sell it better, like it actually helps the people, when it doesn't. And so
it's predatory capitalism.
It is predatory capitalism. And the other thing I'll say is the worst part of the Democratic Party, and why I think the Democratic Party is so complicit over the last 50 years in the corporate takeover of our government and the rise of fascism in America and the rise of Donald Trump, is that what the Democratic Party is it occupies the space for where a real left party should be. Because the Democratic Party isn't a left party, right? It's a right-wing kind of party that believes in some social, in some social policies, or some, believes in gay marriage. But for me, it's economically, it's a right-wing party.
Yeah.
It's bought and paid for by corporations, and it helps the rich make more money. And so when you realize that, think about that. When you have two parties, say you call the Democratic Party a corporatist party and the GOP a fascist party. When a corporate party and a fascist party compromise, you don't get legislation that helps the working class. You don't get laws that help, the poor, or that help everyday Americans.
Yeah.
When a corporate party and a fascist party compromise, you get laws that help Wall Street, giant corporations, and the ruling class.
And the military. And the
military industrial complex. If we had a real left party fighting against the fascist party, when they met in the middle and compromised, the legislation would be a lot better than legislation that was all the way over here. So that's what people are missing. They're not understanding that the Democratic Party occupies the space of where a true people's party and a true working class labor party should be. And so that ends up just making America go further and further to the right. And then, yes, Republicans are so bad and blatant about it that the Democrats just go like this: oh, look, don't pay attention to Ryan Knight, who's criticizing me right now, because look how bad Trump is. Don't pay attention to these progressives who want everyone to have health care and want future generations to have a habitable planet. Pay attention to Trump over there. They bait and they fearmonger around, look how bad Trump is. And then what people don't realize is, okay, fine. Even if Trump is as scary as the corporate Democrats say he is, that doesn't mean that you can't fight for something better. That doesn't mean that you can't fight for the transformative policies that the people need and deserve. And so it shouldn't be an either or. And that's why you have to hold the Democrat Party accountable. If you don't hold them accountable, they will always be the vote for us because we're not as bad as the Republicans.
Yeah.
And what kind of an agenda is that? How are we ever going to move this nation forward if we're, in 2028, they're saying to us, if you don't vote for Pete Buttigieg, then you're going to elect Tom Cotton. Or in 2024, they're going to say, if you don't vote for Kamala Harris, you're going to elect Donald Trump Jr. These arguments that are using now to get you to support Joe Biden, the DNC is going to keep recycling them for the next, as long as they can get away with it. They will never change. And one thing I'll say is that if you want to know why you can't, I don't think you can. I used to be like you. I used to believe that we could move the Democratic Party left. I don't believe that anymore. And here's why. When you say that you can move the Democratic Party left, what you're saying is that you can move Wall Street left. What you're saying is that you can move the oligarchs left. You can move the fossil fuel industry left. You can move the giant corporations left. The Democratic Party is bought, paid for, and beholden to these special interests.
Well, that's how you move it to the left, is by having people that are in there that are not those people.
Well, of course, but how are we ever going to break through when, like, for instance, in the primary, the Democrats spent millions of dollars to stop progressives like you from winning?
Yep.
They spent Charles Booker, who I think would have beaten Mitch McConnell. They spent like $40 million just to stop him. You know what I mean? Like the
But
DNC
Cori Bush
spends,
got through and Jamal
did.
Bowman
No,
got
you're right. We
through.
do get some, but the problem is, like, again, 92% of the Democratic Party is not progressive. So I think, again, I support both strategies. As long as the DNC is in power and as long as they have corporate lobbyists who sit on the DNC board, how are you going to move them left when they're beholden to institutions like Wall Street that won't move left?
Yeah, well, and I don't think that you have any chance of moving them to the left. What I think is that we have a chance to remove the tentacles of corporations from our institutions. And I see that in a nonpartisan manner. Personally, I'll support non-corporate Republicans before I'll support a corporate Democrat. I don't mind conservative values if you're representing conservative people. If you're a representative for an area that is conservative, you ought to be a conservative representative because that's your area. So I don't get caught up in, it's not so much moving them to the left as much as it's unhinging the corporate tentacles.
Agreed.
And when you do that in across the board, in a nonpartisan manner, you will eventually have representation of constituents. And that will land, in terms of progressive or conservative, exactly where it's supposed to land if people are representing their constituents.
100%. But the question is, that is going to take 50 years.
Yes.
Do we have the time? And that is why, in addition to your strategy, you got to do it all. We got to do what you're saying. I agree with you 100%. And I hope you run again in 2022. No pressure. But, I hope that people, I'm not saying don't challenge these corporate Democrats. Yes, replace them. Transform the Democratic Party all you want. I just think, again, think of it this way. If, say, we keep building this People's Party and say we run a major candidate like we plan to do in 2024. Okay. Say that candidate is running a campaign very similar to what Bernie Sanders ran in 2016 and 2020, if not a little bit more progressive, because we're going to need that. We're going to need more radical as corporations are going to get even more power in Joe Biden's presidency. Now, imagine right now if Bernie didn't run again in the Democratic primary like he did in 2016, and he actually ran in a third party or ran as the People's Party candidate in 2020, and say we had done this work and built an apparatus. First off, we won't have to send progressive candidates to these Democratic primaries that the DNC is going to continue to rig against us. Like anyone who's truly progressive, if you think that the DNC is going to allow a truly progressive candidate to win their primary without them doing everything they possibly can to interfere, you weren't paying attention in 2016 and 2020.
No,
so part of the reason we need a separate party is so we can just skip the Democratic primary. We will have our own People's Party primary in 2020 that, unlike the way the DNC runs theirs, ours will be Democratic. We won't interfere. We will allow the candidate who wins the most votes and who the people choose. Go figure. Be the candidate.
Be the candidate.
We won't put our fingers or our thumbs on the scale. Now, hear me out though. So we'll send our candidate. There will be, if you can have a viable third party, we've run the polling on this, 57% of Americans want a real major third party that is a labor working class party. Bernie Sanders right now, if he was running against Joe Biden and Donald Trump, he'd have a very good chance of beating them because he'd only have to win around 34% of the vote, right? Everything is going to be split a third, a third, a third. So if you can run a popular, populist, progressive candidate, we'll definitely cross the 15% threshold to get on the debate stage. And then when 70 million people watch that first debate in 2024, that's a huge audience to bring progressive policies and progressive values to. You'll have the two corporate candidates arguing the same old shtick, and you'll have a true progressive, someone like a Nina Turner or a Marianne Williamson, or, I don't know, I'm just throwing names out of a hat, but a true progressive actually fighting for the working class. I think we can put together a coalition that would appeal to working class Republicans, working class independents, and leftists without watering down any of our policies. So I do think there's a path, if you do it right, to beat these corporate parties, because these corporate parties aren't representing the people.
It's just a matter of seeing it done. And so I watched the People's party, the convention. And I of course am very supportive of all things that. And the truth is I support Nina Turner regardless of party. So she could be
Same.
running under the Hokey Pokey party and I'm going to
Yeah.
support Nina Turner.
Me too.
So, that's that. But, it's sort of like, okay, there's this idea as to doing it, but then actually
executing.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that ultimately to me is where the Greens have always fallen short. That's why, and even DSA, I think has an opportunity, but they're not doing anything unified.
Well, they're just trying to transform the Democratic Party. Their DSA runs candidates in. So people always say this to me, like, why don't you support the DSA? Well, they're not an actual independent party that's outside of the Dems. They're trying to, and I agree with their agenda. I agree we need more Democratic socialists in Congress.
They could be a party.
They could be, but they choose to stay within the party.
Exactly.
And so I believe firmly that we need to challenge these corporate parties, because if we do, I think that is what will finally break the duopoly. I think if 70 million Americans get to hear a real progressive on that stage, that they will finally wake up and realize that, like, the problem is not Republicans or Democrats. The problem is Republicans and Democrats.
It is. And
the problem is the corporate duopoly who rigged the system against us. Because when you finally break out of your partisan camps, like, again, I used to be a blindly obedient vote blue no matter who Democrat 4 years ago. But when I finally opened my eyes, I realized that, like, this is what the oligarchs do. They get liberals and conservatives fighting. They get, liberals in their MSNBC bubble. They get conservatives in their Fox News bubble. And Fox News tells conservatives that liberals are the problem. And MSNBC tells liberals that conservatives are the problem. And so while liberals and conservatives are fighting each other, what they're not seeing is, meanwhile, the corporate parties are rigging the system against us and rigging it for the 1%, because the
money gets siphoned to the top.
And the 99% is too busy fighting each other and not seeing what is actually going on.
Yeah.
That the money is being siphoned to the top.
Yeah, it's a distraction.
And they're also, like, let's be clear about this. Our government uses tragedies like the 2008 housing crash and financial crisis and the pandemic, like we just had. Our government, both parties in both of those crises, what did they both agree to? When working people and poor people and middle-class people in this country were struggling in 2008 and 2020, both corporate parties made a decision to bail out Wall Street, the big banks, and their corporate donors again. And they just did that in February when this pandemic struck. So yes, I get it. When I hear liberals, well, Trump killed 200,000 Americans. Sure, but guess what? Nancy Pelosi and Senator Schumer and the Democratic Party, they have a part in it, because when the pandemic struck, they agreed to bail out the richest Americans. They agreed with the Republicans.
They're complicit. They're very complicit.
And they dress it up. They dressed up the bailout and called it the CARES Act, right? They always be careful what they call things, because things like the Patriot Act, right? That is surveillance against the American people. They always give things like Citizens United that took our government away from us. They always dress up things that are really bad for us with good names to try to sell it to the public. So I'm just saying,
it works.
Be careful, because the CARES Act provided no care to the people and gave it was a massive wealth transfer to the richest Americans. And we've seen, since both corporate parties passed the CARES Act in February or March, what have we seen? We've seen the American billionaires have made over $845 billion during this pandemic, while we're seeing the working class and the poor experience massive levels of poverty and wealth inequality. And we're seeing food lines, we're seeing energy bills being shut down, we're seeing people getting evicted. I mean, there was a report that 40 million Americans aren't getting enough food to eat. People are losing their health care, and yet both corporate parties won't support Medicare for all. I mean, the disconnect between what happens in Washington and what the needs are for the American people is so severe, and we've got to stop that. We've got to fight for a government that represents all of us, or this insanity will keep continuing no matter which president wins, right? No matter if it's the blue team that's owned by the oligarchs or the red team that's also owned by the oligarchs. You can keep replacing them with each other.
It's controlled opposition.
If they're both owned by the rich, then they're both going to govern for the rich.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I think it comes down to more and more people being aware of this,
Right.
understanding how it works. And so the more we use our platform to put this out here and say, look, we need a labor movement in this country. We need a
Right.
labor, I mean,
A
and
labor
yeah,
party,
we do, but
like we're building with the People's Party.
it needs the movement for a people's party. And, I think that that is definitely something that has to be happening. But we need more importantly is just for people to recognize the complete dearth of representation for labor. Now, we could say, oh, it's the Democrats used to be that and then they shifted to the right. I would argue that they never really were that in the first place. And even if you want to talk about FDR, and yeah, he was definitely pressured by left parties. But the reality is he was a very big member of the aristocracy, and he was going to save capitalism for him and his own, recognizing that the natives were too restless and that you can't build moats wide enough. And I'm actually hopeful that that's where we have reached again with people, as you start seeing people putting up guillotines in front of like Jeff Bezos' house and
Yep.
stuff. And more and more, and not that I am suggesting decapitating Jeff Bezos. Let me put that out. I'm not. But just the fact that more people are becoming aware of where our problems lie. And instead of fighting for that constantly kick down, whether it's the immigrants, whatever it is, oh, the Chinese virus, the Mexican, we got to build the wall. That's just trying to punch, kick down, and we need to be punching up. So every time that
Yes.
I see any movement towards calling out the oligarchy, it's inspiring to me in
Yep.
that regard, because people are recognizing that the problem is up and not down.
And there are millions of Americans, I am one of them, who believes that the system cannot be reformed, that the system is so corrupt that it must be replaced. And when we talk about that kind of systemic change, that is what something like the People's Party is, because the party, which will be, we're going to have a founders convention next year. And unlike the DNC, where they have corporate lobbyists on their board, the board of the People's Party is all of you who are listening, is every single person who wants to be a part of the People's Party. You don't even have to give, you don't even have to donate. Every single person will get to vote on the platform. And the one rule that the party has, no matter what, like, unfortunately, people won't get to vote on this one, is that we will take zero corporate money from any point moving forward, because we truly believe that corporate money is what corrupted the other two parties. So that is kind of the founding principle of the People's Party, that our representatives, if we get People's Party candidates, populists into Congress, when the corporate lobbyists come knock on their doors, people who are under the People's Party would say, oh no, I work for the people. Like, I don't talk to corporate lobbyists, because we won't take any of it. We will not allow anyone who runs under the People's Party banner to take $1 of corporate PAC money, or any money that could corrupt. It's very much the model of $5 donations, grassroots donations, because that means that we will work for the people. Because that's what's happening now. Wall Street and the ruling class and the corporations give money to the two corporate parties, so then the corporate parties work for them. It's just how it works. So that kind of systemic change, if we could get a party into our government that wasn't bought and paid for, then they would write laws that, instead of laws that benefited corporations, the laws would benefit the working class. Because that, when people talk about rigging the system, the way the corporate parties rig the system is through laws. They literally write laws that help Wall Street and hurt working people. Things like the bankruptcy bill that Joe Biden wrote, things like the crime bill, things like the ACA, that, these things hurt the working class of our country and the poor, and help the ruling class. So if you can get people who aren't bought, and you can get a party in government that isn't one of the corporate parties, they can actually write laws that instead of benefiting Wall Street, they will write laws like canceling student debt, and write laws like Medicare for all, and write laws like a Green New Deal that actually help the working people of this country.
Let me ask you though, like, about the hurdles in terms of getting third party access into all the different states. I mean, it's not something that's easy, or it would be done a lot more. There's states where I don't think they have any third parties. And every state is different.
Every state's, yeah. So we're working with 2 ballot experts. That was my big concern. I'm not worried about marketing because look what we did with the People's
Yeah,
Convention.
no,
We
marketing
did the
isn't.
People's Convention in 3 weeks, and
Yeah.
we we were not covered by. I mean, obviously, we couldn't even air it on because CNN won't air the People's Convention and MSNBC won't air the People's Convention. That's kind of the way the oligarchs maintain control of of our country, with just only giving platforms to the 2 corporate parties. But we've had like almost, I think we had over 1 million people watch the convention in the first 5 days. So we must be up to almost 2 million now, just
Yeah.
streaming it on YouTube. And so I'm not worried about messaging. I'm not worried about marketing. I'm worried about executing on getting on ballots. And
Yeah.
so I have expressed that to the powers that be and told them, like, we need to work with ballot experts. And so I was just told a few weeks ago that we're working with 2 ballot experts to get on the plan is to be on all 50 states by 2024. And be on like 30 states by 2022, because you're absolutely right. There are certain states that it will take more than 2 years to get on the ballots. There's some states you have to run a governor's candidate and get at least 2% of the vote, which again, we're confident we can do that. Like, there's a lot of it is just collecting a certain amount of signatures, which again, with our platforms, we've got millions of followers on social media. So we're confident that we can execute. And we're confident because we know that the people want this. We know that, whether Trump or Joe Biden wins, we know that it's not a win for the working class. It's not a win for the poor. It's not a win for the planet. It's just another win for the oligarchy.
Yeah.
And we want a politics that is a win for the people, that is a win for, society at large. And so where no one is left behind, the progressive policies, something that's not talked a lot is, while these policies pushed by the corporate parties help the rich, when you look at things like Medicare for all and a Green New Deal and universal basic income, they include everyone. They don't leave anyone out. Everyone is included in progressive policies. That's why they're better. Some people don't like them because they make over $250,000 and don't want to pay a little more taxes. Guess what? Too bad. Because the person who only makes $40,000 a year deserves to live with as much dignity as you do. And right now they can't, because all of the wealth is stuck up here. So we need policies that don't leave anyone behind, like the policies pushed by the corporate parties. So that is, I am confident that now that they're working with a ballot expert, that we can continue to build this. Again, it's going to take a lot of people power. It's one day at a time. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's happening. And the other part of the strategy is it's not just electoral. We also believe in direct action and being on the ground in communities. And that's the reason I got involved. And even Andrew Yang and Humanity Forward joined the Movement for People's Party efforts 6 months ago, when we protested outside of Congress people's homes to demand a people's bailout. Those were our protests. We did that all over the country. We were at Mitch McConnell's house. We were at Susan Collins' house. We were at everyone. We were at Democrats' house demanding that they bail out the American people, not their corporate donors. So we believe, and we were just at Jeff Bezos's $130 million mansion, demanding that he pay every worker a $25 an hour living wage and give them all paid time off. And, a bunch of working class people in the Amazon warehouses just came down with coronavirus because the working conditions were not satisfactory. So we were just outside of his house in LA protesting. So we believe in showing up in the community and also having an electoral strategy too.
Right. It's both. It's election politics and it's direct action. And I think that it's equally important. I agree. So other than anything other than Movement for People's Party that you're up to, that you want to promote, that you want to talk about?
If people want to listen to my weekly podcast where I have lots of progressives on, I've had Senator Nina Turner. I've had you on the show when you were running. I just had Angela Walker, who's the vice presidential candidate for the Green Party, on last week.
I like her.
She's amazing. She's such
I really do like her.
Such a strong voice for progressives. And she believes in what we're fighting for, and she doesn't back down, and she doesn't buy the mainstream media excuse of like, oh, it's radical that everyone has a living wage and everyone has healthcare and housing. Like, that's not radical. That's compassionate and reasonable. So You can check out my podcast. It's called Amped Up with Ryan Knight. It's on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And I've endorsed candidates like David Kim, who's running. He's a progressive Democrat and challenging a corporate Democrat. I urge everyone to support his campaign. And Angelica Dueñas is another progressive who is challenging a corporate Democrat just in here, November 3rd in a month. And yeah, I would just encourage people to be active in your democracy. Don't just listen to what I say. Don't listen to what MSNBC says. Listen to like what your heart says. Fight for your values. Like that's what it's about. I truly believe if everyone in this country came at politics from a place of hope and a place of love and compassion, and not a place of, oh, I have to settle, or, oh, I MSNBC said this, or, oh, like, we could never elect a progressive, so why even try? Like, no, like fight for what you believe in, because that's what
vote your
politics
conscience.
is about. Yeah, vote your conscience. Fight for the country you want, because that's in essence like what we're going to need to truly heal this nation and move this nation forward. So,
you know what? It's funny. I wish
Jen,
I had asked you my last question before you said that, because one of the things I say is, so what does the idea of generational change, what does that mean to you? And I think what you just said, it sounded so good about, really just people it's about heart and kindness and how we treat each other going forward. Like, yeah. So what does generational change look like to you?
What it looks like to me is that America is a country that, although it was founded on some good ideals, we've never truly been a free democratic nation. From the moment of our founding, when you found a nation by basically wiping out indigenous populations and enslaving Black people, and then you try to dress that up with a declaration and say this is liberty and freedom and justice. No, those atrocities that you committed when you founded your nation have nothing to do with liberty and justice for all. Those are atrocities. We have got to move from a nation that was founded that way and that was built under this capitalistic, oligarchic, greedy nation that has infiltrated every aspect of our society. And we have to move to a nation that is compassionate and a nation where everyone, I don't care how much money you make, gets to live a life of dignity, and that we value the worth of every single human being in this country. We need to, generational change to me means shifting from a politics of corporate greed to a politics of human need, shifting from a politics of corporate welfare to a politics of human welfare, shifting from a politics that puts profit over everything to a politics that puts our people and our planet over corporate profits. That to me is generational change.
Yeah.
We have got to move in a very bold way to that kind of system. And again, I want to applaud you, Jen, for getting out there and fighting for it in a district that, even though there's a Democrat, I think people don't realize how conservative Debbie Wasserman Schultz is. So
look, she votes with the Republicans all the time. She was one of 30 Democrats that couldn't even see fit to reduce the Pentagon budget by 10%. 10%. 10%. Yeah.
So people like you are bringing generational change to your district. I applaud your courage. What we need now is more of that. We need, I have a friend who's a climate activist who says, Peter Kalmus, who's he's part of the committee for People's Party. He's a scientist. He works for NASA. And he's like, I never wanted to be a radical, but when you look at the data, when you just look at the data scientifically, like, we're past the moment of like running out of time to save, our species from eventual extinction. Like, if we don't take bold action right now, and we know Joe Biden isn't taking bold action right now because he doesn't support bold action on climate, like a Green New Deal and banning fracking and ending fossil fuel subsidies. But the thing he said to me that really struck me is he says, we need 1 billion climate activists in this world. We need in this nation, in this country, to free this country from corporate rule, we need 365 million Jen Perlmans and Brian Knights. I can't do this. Like, I have a platform on Twitter where I've got 360,000 followers. I've got a podcast that gets 20,000 listeners a week, but that's not enough. Like, I'm one voice and I'm exhausted. Like,
Yeah.
we don't have corporate media apparatuses. The only way we're going to bring generational change to America is and beat the machine is by getting 360 million Jens
Exactly.
and Ryans out there that have
Right.
woken up and want to live in a nation that is not living under corporate rule and wants to have a government that actually serves the people. So that when we have another pandemic, the government actually bails out the people instead of Wall
Yeah.
Street. Or the government is actually, instead of spending almost $1 trillion a year to blow up the planet on these endless wars, we're spending that money to save the planet from the climate crisis. This is the kind of generational change we need, but it's never going to happen unless everyone else wakes up and speaks out with us. Be bold, be brave. And if you do that, that's how things change. Things don't change by just going along to get along. Things don't change by going along with the same old, same old. I think that is why I left the Democratic Party 3 months ago officially, and why I'm not voting for Joe Biden. Fine, you were a neoliberal corporatist party for the last 50 years. I would have given you a free pass. But to peddle the same corporate neoliberal,
Swill.
moderate agenda in a moment that demands revolutionary change means that you're complicit. This
Yeah.
was not the moment for the Democrats to just go back to 2016 and peddle a corporate candidate.
That's all
This
they
was the
know.
moment for us to fight for something better. So I would just encourage people, don't color within the lines. Like, this is a moment for dreamers. This is a moment for idealism. This is a moment for free thinkers and for radicals.
Yeah.
This is a moment for people who can see outside the system, because our system is failing. Both corporate parties are failing us. So we need thinkers who can think outside the box and help us build a government that will actually work for our people.